What's up, vintage lovers? Welcome to the Vintage Aquarium. I'm your host, Kate, a writer and storyteller with a passion for all things vintage. Each week, I'll talk with other sellers and collectors about their vintage passions too. We'll share tips and resources, and together, discover the stories and history behind our favorite items. It's time, so let's dive in. Hey everybody, this is Kate. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Vintage Aquarium podcast. I'm so excited today to share our new guest with you, Jennifer Adamson. She's the owner of Shared Belongings, a vintage resale business that she started in 2016. Hi, Jennifer.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you, and then we can just kind of dive in with questions.
Okay, that sounds great.
Jennifer Adamson is a North Carolina native who has lived in Missouri for almost 20 years with her husband. By day, she works in an elementary special needs classroom, teaching communication, socialization, and functional skills to children with autism. By night, she's the owner and operator of Shared Belongings, the vintage resale business that she started in 2016. Her goal is to connect people with pieces of the past and to inspire them to create homes where secondhand is the first choice. You can find her on Etsy and Instagram, where she shares her thrifting adventures and teaches how to style the most beautiful vignettes with ease. Jennifer is also a writer and photographer whose work has been published in Flea Market Decor magazine, as well as other magazines and newspapers. So you are the first published author that we've had on the show.
That's exciting since you're a writer too.
Yeah, I love it. I know. I love that we can talk writing a little bit.
Yeah, awesome.
So much fun. So what, I didn't get to ask you, what did you write for Flea Market magazine?
Well, I did. So I was thinking about what to say for that, and I was like, didn't really write anything except a caption underneath the photograph.
Yeah, but you provided a photograph to them.
But I did. It was my photograph, and I wrote the caption, and it was for Santa's in a Box, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit. So,
oh my gosh, that's so cool. I'm not surprised that they picked that up, because that's really, really fun.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think the title of the article was 20 Santa stopping Instagrammers. So,
very cool.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that today, because that's one of my favorite things on your Instagram. So share a little bit about yourself. Like, I know I did the bio, but just tell us in your own words, like where you're from, what your business is about.
Sure. I'm from North Carolina. I was born and raised there. And then in 2005, I moved to Missouri with my sister. She went to school here. And she was only here for 2 years, and I ended up staying here after she moved home. And about a month later, I met my husband. So we ended up his family's in Oklahoma. And so we ended up just staying here together and have been here for almost 20 years.
That's a great story.
That's really hard to believe.
Yeah, you don't look old enough to have been married for 20 years, I have to say.
Oh, thank you. So when I graduated from Elon University in North Carolina, and then when I moved here in 2005, I had written for my hometown newspaper for a little while back in North Carolina. And then when I moved here, I wrote for the News Leader, which is the newspaper here, and then ended up writing for Missouri State, which is where I met my husband. And that just kind of trickled into some freelance work, because at the same time as I was writing for Missouri State, I went back to school to get my teaching degree. And that's how I ended up in education. So they kind of overlapped for a little while. And then I just I was a classroom teacher, which led to being a behavior interventionist, which now I'm in special education. And that kind of all just happened right after I'd gotten married, and led me to kind of where I am now. So I'm doing some freelance writing, but it's nothing like full-time before. So,
but it sounds like you're pretty busy with between.
I enjoy it.
Yeah, writing and all your creativity with your photography too.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So, so how did you get started with buying and selling vintage? Was this something like a personal hobby, or did you sort of dive right into business with it?
So it's kind of funny because I was thinking about that question you had asked me, like, how did you get into vintage? And I didn't really grow up in a family where that was something we did. Like, they weren't like, everybody get in the car, we're going thrifting. It just, we never really, we lived within our means. We never had anything too extravagant. But I mean, I don't really remember a time when that was something fun to do, not a necessity for us necessarily. And then after I got older, I was really into like following trends. And I did, I shopped at Hobby Lobby and I did all the, your home has to look a certain way based on what's trendy and where people shop. And then I kind of got tired of it. And I kept seeing all these cool things that people were buying at thrift stores. And I thought, it's something fun to do. Let's just go see how we can add maybe some character to the house or whatever. And then that's kind of how I ended up doing the shopping aspect of it. And then selling came from starting a booth, which I did. I had a friend in 2016 when I started the business. I had a friend who invited me to go in on a booth with her, and we actually worked together. And I was like, I'm not really sure about that. And so I decided instead of going in with her to do them by myself. And so I was at one antique mall for a couple years doing it that way, and then ended up switching to a different antique mall that had kind of a more of a curated vibe that was a better fit for me. And then during quarantine, business just was not great because of course no one was out. So many places had to close their brick and mortars. And so I ended up opening my Etsy shop. During that time, I closed my booth actually and did Etsy, and it's been going really well. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am now.
Yeah, that's a lot like my story too, where I started first in person.
Yeah.
And I kind of enjoyed it, but I didn't have the success that I was sort of hoping for. And I thought, online sales seem to be bringing a lot more money and people are really valuing the different items and stuff like that. And so I did the same thing. Like I went to Etsy and I haven't really, I haven't really looked since then.
I mean, I really enjoyed having a booth. I enjoyed, like, especially when I was there and people would come by, it was nice to say hello and meet your customers. But now Etsy's just so much easier in terms of the time that I have with working full time to keep up with it. And like you said, there's a wider audience and it's just worked out a lot better for me.
So are there any other ways that you're selling your vintage items now?
Sometimes I sell on Marketplace. But if it's on Marketplace, I gotta be honest with you, I'm just trying to get rid of it. But yeah, sometimes Marketplace. I sell through stories, sometimes on Instagram and through my posts on Instagram, but mostly I'll just direct people to my Etsy shop.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I'm really interested in maybe sharing a little bit about like what kinds of items you like to collect and sell, because you have a really distinct style that I just love so much.
So I told you earlier that my husband was reading all these questions and he was like, he read this question, he was like, oh, you collect. So he listed some things. I was like, what do you think I collect? And he said, so demi-johns, I really love those.
What's a demi-john?
Okay, so right here, I used to have one sitting here and I was like, no, this looks really ridiculous because it's as big as my head. So I took it down for the video, but let me show.
Okay.
Look.
Oh, okay.
It's just basically a wicker wrapped bottle.
Interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes they have labels, sometimes not. It depends, whatever condition you find them in. But anyway, it was sitting right here and I was like, this is too much. I'm taking it down.
And then I asked you what it is. Well, I've never heard it called that before. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Yeah, so demi-john. So you collect those?
I do. I have several. I love them. What else do I collect? Santa mugs. That's probably one of my favorite things is vintage Santa mugs. They don't have to be made in Japan. I love the Holt Howard ones, but they got to be vintage. So Santa mugs, I have a huge collection. I love them so much. Ironstone, which you can see, like there's some back here, and my Easter rabbits, which I still haven't taken down yet. Ironstone, I have some clocks. I have some quilts. I love old quilts. And sometimes I craft out of those too, which I enjoy. I make fabric pumpkins in the fall, and they're usually a pretty big hit. I do sell those in my shop, but so I collect the quilts to, if they're a good thickness, I can sell them up for those. But yeah,
Yeah, I have a thing for vintage quilts too.
there's
So
just something about them. I don't know.
they have so much history, and like I always
Yeah.
imagine the idea behind that, because women had, well, usually, actually a lot of men quilt now, which I find to be really interesting, because it's traditionally like a woman's craft, but I love to think about where the fabrics came from, especially if they're older, if they were repurposed, or
Right.
what was in their mind when they were trying to put together the different patterns and fabrics and stuff. I love.
Yeah, you're really into textiles too. I remember you telling me that. So
yeah, I love textiles. So when you say vintage, this is always like a great question. When you say vintage, what's your era for that? What do you think?
okay, so I wish I'd known you were going to ask me this, because I don't want to say it wrong. I'm fairly certain antique is 100 or more years old. Vintage, I think, has to be at least 20 years old. So basically, you're looking at that 80-year gap. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's the definition for sure.
Yeah.
So when you collect your Santa mugs, do you feel like something from the 90s is vintage enough for you, or do you want to go back further than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not really particular, honestly, on whether it's vintage or antique. If I like the look of it, I'm down. Like, I want to have it. But yeah, Santa mugs, and it depends who makes them and when they're made, but most of them are. I don't think there are any antique Santa mugs. I could be very wrong about that. I'm not a Santa mug expert. I think most of them are vintage, like the Holt Howard ones. They were made in the 1960s.
Yeah. So that's kind of like about your era. If they have the look, they have to have the vintage look.
Yeah.
My favorite era for that kind of stuff is 50s, 60s. With the big rosy cheeks, and
yes.
And I do like the Japan like style, because they made everything sort of character-y. They gave them, character.
And so colorful too. Like, I think for a long time I had told you before, I was super trendy back in the day, trying to keep up. And there's trends in vintage too, but I think I've learned to just like what I like. And I think I let social media and magazines and people I would communicate with tell me that I loved farmhouse. And so for a while I was like, everything has to be chippy, everything has to be white, everything has to be rusty. And I still do love all that stuff. I mean, look at that pot. But I also really like color. And so I don't shy away from that anymore. And so, like, speaking of the Japan stuff, a lot of stuff that you find that's made in Japan, they did a lot of pottery that's very colorful, that type of thing. Like, I just enjoy having color. It makes me happy. So
yeah, that's fun. I think people are discovering color again after the farmhouse era.
Yeah, definitely.
I've always loved color, but I mean, there's something to be said for like a nice neutral color,
Oh, agreed. And when you have like a solid base of neutral, then you can layer in that color, and that works well too. So
yeah, that's really that's something that we're going to talk about more, because I know you have a lot of ideas for staging and styling things.
Yes.
So why did you name your business Shared Belongings?
I put a lot of thought into the name. It was really difficult for me to name my business, because I think it kind of becomes your identity in a sort of way. But I think no matter what you resell or what the name of your business is, the goal of all sellers is really the same, right? I mean, if you're a vintage reseller, your goal is to connect people with pieces of the past, restore life to these forgotten objects. And so when I was thinking about that and like how to name my business, I kind of wanted it to reflect that idea. Like, that was kind of the idea behind it all. And so I decided on Shared Belongings, because basically, I guess that's kind of a collective term for all the objects that I find, they've been previously loved, and then I love them, and then I pass them on to be loved by someone else. So, at a certain point, they're shared between all of us. And so that kind of made sense to me.
I think it's such a I don't know, that it's such a sweet name, and it evokes like some emotion in me when I think about that shared
I love
belonging,
that.
because it does express, I think, like a level of care that you're, and you can tell from your posts, the way that you photograph your items and display them and things, that you care about those things. You put care into it, and you
Thank
share
you. That means
your
so much.
you share your talents and your abilities, and you share these items with people and give them, I think that they're very inspiring. That's one of the reasons that I just really like stopped on your Instagram feed, and truly wanted you to be a guest on here, because I think that your look, I want to say design, but your aesthetic is just very inspiring. And
Thank you so much.
I'm glad you're sharing that with us and with other people. So I think
Yeah.
your name is super appropriate.
Thank you very much. I've only ever had a couple people say, that's a really clever name. And I don't care about that. But I do hope people get it. Like sometimes I think a lot of people who recently might have vintage in their name, or they may have something that indicates what they do or what they sell. And so that was kind of one of the things where I was like, I hope people get it.
I think so. Yeah, I think definitely. I mean,
Good.
especially anybody that really loves vintage, because we all love it because of its uniqueness, its history,
Yeah.
the energy that it carries with it from one home to the next.
Yeah.
So I think all that's conveyed in the name shared belonging.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about Instagram. So Instagram is where I found you, and I and again, I really enjoyed seeing the way that you style your items and that kind of stuff. So I was hoping that maybe, people would be able to take a look at your Instagram and see some of the things that we're talking about.
So Instagram started in 2010, and it was very different than it is now. A lot of things have changed. It was still relatively new at the time that I started my business, which was 2016. And I think that because it was in the forefront of people's minds and lots of people were using it, I thought that that would be kind of the best way for me to market my business. Because I decided to sell vintage, and I was like, let's do it. And now I have a booth, and how am I going to get people to come to my booth? So if you scroll all the way back on my feed, there's like really horrible photos of my booth, like just saying there's a new booth in Springfield, come check it out. And so that's kind of was the initial, like, I need a place to market my business. And that, because Instagram was it was right there, that's the one I decided to go with. And I like the format of Instagram too. I'm on Facebook a little bit, but not as much as Instagram, but I do like the scroll. I like the square pictures. I just think it's set up really well. And I think it's pretty user friendly. I do several different types of posts. One of the posts I do is get to know you. And I don't do those too often, but I do like to show my face because I think that's important to your customers to see that they're interacting with a real person. And that's fun to go to and stories and do on stories as well. Because you can either do stories live, which I don't do stories live, or you can just film yourself. I do a lot of like filming myself thrifting or things like that. And I think that's fun for people to watch because they can see, I'm pretty straightforward, and like what you see is what you get. So I don't like edit too much out. I just live my life, and people seem to really enjoy that. So I do those get to know you posts, and sometimes in stories, I'll film myself doing thrifting. And then I also like to do, of course, just how to style vignette. I post vignettes and then offer tips for how to style them, or just show people the combination of things that can work together. And then I also do shop my square posts, which if I'm not doing a post that is directing people to a restock on Etsy, then it might be a Shop My Square. And a Shop My Square is basically where I would gather some items that I want to sell and post them in a vignette. And then I would say that everything in this vignette is for sale. And you would scroll through the caption to find the prices, the sizes, the like condition of the items. And then basically, you know, if it's a vase and it's $50, then somebody would comment if they wanted it sold vase. And what I do is I would then message them directly and send them an Etsy listing that I've created for them for that particular item. There's lots of different ways to collect payment there, but we don't have to get into. That's just what I do is on Etsy. Some people do PayPal or Venmo or whatever, but it's easier for me to do Etsy. But yeah, that's how you would claim something, is just to say in the comments, sold.
All right. And then they could just purchase it through us, Etsy.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that helps? Like, do you sell more items in a, like if you're gonna, I mean, I would think that maybe the point of doing that would be to try to sell a couple of items in a shorter period of time. Like, does that help promote them?
Yes. And I think too, there's kind of an urgency that comes along with, like, I don't know, someone told me once, when there's something on Etsy, you can think about it. If it's just sitting in your Etsy shop, you know, people have time to see if there's a watering can that's $30, or if they want to buy yours, that's $45. Whereas if you're doing something on your square, on your feed, and I've even done auctions on my feed before, you know, it's pretty like you got to claim it or somebody else will. And so I do think that boosts sales sometimes. And I like the excitement of like posting a square and then seeing if somebody, now if somebody doesn't want to claim it, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not going well. But if they do, then it's like, all right, I sold something, you know, and people are very understanding of like the time frame of all that. Like, I got to get you your listing, you got to purchase it, all of that. But yeah, those are fun, Shop My Squares.
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good tip, like a you know, something that people might like to try to do something different. And because I mean, it does sometimes you want to mix it up a little bit, like,
yeah, for real. And the auctions, like I said, are fun too, because you may have an item that trying to think what I might put up for an auction. Well, last year I did a couple Santa mugs that were in excellent condition. I think one of them was a Holt Howard. And I was like, you know what? I know these are going for a pretty penny. Let's just see what happens in an auction. And so I put it on my feed and I said, starting bid is, I don't know, $30. And then people would just comment, and you tell them like, okay, $5 increments. And so the bid, I think at one point for one of them, the bid got up to $125. And so I was like, excellent, because I probably wouldn't have put that in my Etsy shop for that. I mean, you know, it's just really kind of a neat way to see what people want, where their price points are. Yeah. And like you said, just kind of mix it up, because you don't want to do everything the same all the time. People get bored.
It gets very exciting to see
the
number go up and yeah, I mean, you're right. It does have a lot to do with like where people are at the time, what's kind of popular. And I mean, that is kind of a way to like dip your toe in a little bit and get sort of a temperature on what people are interested in, what they're willing to pay for things.
Well, and like that's the same with the booth too, is like I would go in and nothing had sold. And then I would move something around, and then a week later it'd be gone, or even a day later it would be gone. But it's got to be the right person at the right time who loves that item, is willing to pay that price. You know, it's the same with online shopping.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So those are great ideas. Thanks for sharing those. Are there any other ways that you sell on Instagram?
The only other way that I can think of, but it's a really big one, and I love doing it so much, is called Virtual Flea Market Saturday. And basically what that is it was started by two of my dear friends on Instagram during the pandemic. They realized, or, you know, kind of brainstormed, nobody's going to be able to shop vintage in person anymore. So how are people going to still acquire the vintage things that they want? And so what they did is they put together Virtual Flea Market Saturday, and they got together with a few other sellers. I like to call them seller sisters. They got together with some seller sisters, and basically what they did is for the first couple weeks leading up to the sale, they just kind of promoted each other through posts, through stories, and just kind of said like, this is, I was not part of the first one, so I don't know kind of how all that went down, but what it has evolved into is what I'm speaking about. And it's just basically this group of seller sisters who we do posts and stories about each other's sales leading up to the day of the sale. And then it's a Saturday that we all do a post and say, okay, now we have all these goods available, and you would either shop Someone Square, or you would shop their Etsy, or you would go to their website, or you would go to their stories. Sometimes people have story sales. So it was just kind of a way to offer vintage goods still to people, despite the fact that we couldn't go out and actually shop in person. And it's really taken off. I mean, quarantine was what, 3 years ago, 2 years ago? And it's still going. Like, people are super into it too. And I do it about every 3 months or so, 4 months maybe. And I just love it. And that's something else that I really like about Instagram is when you find your people, it's like, you know, you really do kind of, there's a sense of community and there's a sense of supporting each other. And, you know, you are each other's competition in a sense, but you're also not. I mean, you have your own clientele, they have their clientele. We all offer different things, but it's just really nice to be able to interact with other sellers. And then sometimes on the side, we'll have chats about different things. And, you know, people share their wisdom and their knowledge. And, you know, has anybody seen this mark on the bottom of this plate? Like, can you tell me about this maker? And it's just been really helpful to kind of be within that community and learn from each other and support each other. It just kind of takes not the pressure off, but it makes it fun, and it makes it, you know, it makes it fun. I don't know how else to say it. Like, it's just like, you know, hanging out with your friends, except you don't never see each other in person.
Yeah. Well, that's so creative. I mean, I think so many creative things came out of the pandemic, as awful as it was. People had to really come up with some new ideas, and
yeah, agreed.
And that sounds really fun.
Yeah.
Do you want to give a shout out to anybody?
Okay, so the ladies who started it, it's Jeanette at Life Has Repurpose and Renee at Havenberry Vintage. Hello, friends.
On Instagram, you also participate in challenges. So this is something that I've seen, but you're really the first person that I've talked to who not only participates them, but has kind of created one of her own.
Yeah.
So what are challenges, and what do you like about them?
So let me first say, Instagram is constantly changing. Now, I'm not an Instagram coach. I'm not an Instagram expert, but again, it started, you know, in 2010, and so many things are different now. But challenges way back used to be, and still are, really not much has changed about them. It's just that people have to decide, okay, I want to have a hashtag. And if people aren't creating the hashtags for the challenges, then there aren't challenges. But, you know, the algorithm for Instagram is always favoring something different. And I think that challenges, when I first started, were a thing that kind of helped people to engage with each other, and also to help grow their accounts. So basically what happens is, like I said, somebody invents a hashtag. So one of my favorite ones is Tell Us Your Vintage Story, hashtag Tell Us Your Vintage Story. And it's hosted by a group of people. Someone created that hashtag and then said to some friends, hey, do you want to host this hashtag with me? And so basically what you do is you would take a picture of something in your home or a vignette that you've styled, and in the caption for this particular hashtag, you would tell your vintage story. Like, it might be a picture that you got for $5 that's worth $100, or, you know, a great thrifting story or something like that. And then basically it's usually they run for a week or 2 weeks. And then the host of that hashtag will look through all those images and read the stories and decide which is their favorite. And then that image and that person's account gets posted on all of their feeds for that particular, like winning moment.
Okay.
And so it's basically just a way to kind of get your name out there, and make friends along the way. Cause you do connect sometimes with people that you didn't know, you might not know everybody who's hosting a hashtag. And so you'll go to their feeds and you'll look and see and watch their stories. And yeah, it's just kind of a fun way to engage with people. One of my other favorites is virtual vintage hunt. And for that challenge, the hosts provide a list of things that you have to include within your vignette. And then they choose the best for the win that week. So that's also one of my favorites. And, they're also a really good way. Sometimes I'm just like, my ideas are stale and I have no ideas. And I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I'll look at those challenges and I'll think, oh, okay, so if I grab a rolling pin, if I grab a cutting board, if I grab a dough bowl, and then it just kind of gets your juices flowing as to like how you could style things. And then sometimes I just go to favorite accounts too and look and see what they've done recently. Another favorite hashtag is copycat vignettes. And that's where the hosts actually go to someone's feed and pick a photo that they love. And then they challenge everyone to copy that photograph. So that's fun. There's a lot of flexibility there with, the objects that you could use, but that's a fun one too. But again, it's just about community really and being inspired.
These are all great. Well, they do that in the writing world too, which is kind of funny. Writing prompts. And so
yes,
you get prompts. It just helps, get your creativity going when you're feeling like you can't think of anything to do. So there is one that you came up with that we mentioned earlier in the podcast, and that's Santa's in a Box.
Yes, I'm so proud of it. It's been so much fun, and I don't really know how it came to me. I just one day stuck my Santa's in a box, and I was like, this is a fun hashtag. Let's create it. So like you mentioned, it's been featured in Flea Market Decor magazine, and it's just something that I keep up with every season. And I think this Christmas it will be, I want to say 4 or 5 years since it started, and it's just fun to see people playing along. And it doesn't have to be a box; it can be a basket, it can be a flower pot, it can be any kind of vessel that you just stick your Santas in. And I also personally love collections en masse. Like I just think they just make such a statement, and there's just something about collecting a collection that's like just it appeals to me. So I think that was one of the things that when I was working on the first one, I was like, oh, I like all these Santas together. And so that's how that came about.
Yeah, they do look really amazing together. And I was so surprised to see because Santa's in a Box seems pretty specific, I would say. Get your Santas, put them in a box or whatever. But like all of the creative ways and everybody's look so different from each other. And it just gives you, it's very joyful holiday feeling too.
Definitely.
So it's a great way to show off your collection to the Instagram world.
I hope people will be into it again this year. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a box. It can be, I think I've used an enamel bowl before. I've used a toolbox, a suitcase, a wood box, I think was the first one. So it's just, again, a chance to be creative and just, I don't know, my brain needs that. My brain craves creativity after a long day at work. So.
Well, I'm going to be on the lookout out for it this year.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I'm going to be doing Santa's in a Box.
Excellent.
So your vignettes, we've kind of talked about those a little bit and how you put together items either that you're going to sell or that you collected. So they really stand out on your page. And I was hoping that maybe you would take a few minutes to just kind of walk our listeners through the process that you go through when you're styling. And I did notice that you had some steps on your Instagram as well to kind of try to help teach people this process. And I think it's really neat the way that you approach it. So
that post is pinned to the top of my feed. It has several tips, like you just said. I think when I'm ready to create, I don't know, I'm a very spontaneous creator. like, I don't usually plan things out. I'm just like, I come home from work and I'm like, yes, let's create a vignette. And it may be things I've thrifted, things I own. But I've learned over time that I have kind of a way of putting everything together that is kind of specific, but it works with lots of different objects. And so all those steps are outlined in the post that I have at the top of my feed, which I'm actually looking at right now because I'm never going to be able to remember all this. So basically what you want to do first, or what I do first, is I kind of prepare my space. So I always start with a clean slate. It can be a table, it can be a bench, it can be a bookshelf, it can be anything that you have a flat surface that you want to create on, or you want to make a vignette out of. And then I always look for ways to kind of add texture to my vignette. So I'll grab a quilt, I'll grab a piece of lace, so you can see back here how I kind of laid that. This is an old tablecloth, actually. Oh, look at this branch just keeping in the way the whole time. That's an old tablecloth. You know, I like texture and I like depth. And so I kind of, in the beginning, will round up the things I want to use. And it can be anything that you want. I always especially like to grab a piece of artwork. I like for things to have kind of a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. And so by putting a piece of artwork in the back, your eye kind of travels from the front of the vignette all the way through the vignette to the artwork. And I think that's important in kind of seeing all the things that are in the vignette. So that's something that I really like to do. It's also, I often use the painting as kind of a color wheel for pulling together objects for that vignette. So if I'm uninspired what to pull for the vignette, I might go find a favorite painting and I might see the colors in that and then try to choose objects that have those same colors that will all tie in together.
I love that. I love that because I was going to ask you how you decided on your colors. So
yeah, like I had said earlier, I don't really shy away from color anymore, but I just feel like when you put together a vignette, you want it to be eye-catching. It all kind of needs to flow and work together. So color is even if it's neutrals, you really should pay attention to that. It makes it just so much more outstanding. So
do you have a focal point in your vignette, and how do you decide what that would be?
So typically when I style a vignette, I style it from left to right. That's just how my styling things from right to left feels kind of odd to me. So from left to right, and I usually do in a waterfall design, which if you can picture like something very high up in the left corner, and then something lower in the middle, and then something the lowest on the right. I hope I did that right. I think that's right. Yeah. It just kind of helps the eye to travel through the vignette. So I would say the focal point is often the biggest object, but it's kind of unintentional. It's just the way it works when you're styling. And then if I do have a focal point, something else I've noticed is I shoot in portrait mode a lot, which I did not used to do, but I shoot in portrait mode. And that definitely, like, the whole idea of portrait mode is to single out an object and kind of make everything else blurry. So sometimes if I want there to be a focal point, then I'll do portrait mode. But it also kind of depends on how many items I have in the vignette. Like if I'm doing a loot shoot where I am showing you everything that I've gotten thrifting during the weekend, there's not really a focal point. It's just like, hey, look at all this stuff, but maybe I want to highlight in the next post a flower pot that I picked up that I think is really cool. So I may find a way to make that the focal point with portrait mode and then do some styling in the background that kind of, it all flows together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So how many items do you usually put together in a vignette, or does it
really depends? I keep looking over here at my table where, like, right now I just have a cutting board and a little stoneware jar, and it's adorable. It just really depends, I think, what I'm in the mood for and the type of photograph that I'm trying to take. If it's a shop my square photograph, then it might have 8 items. If it's a loot shoot, it may have 20 items. So it just depends. If it's an auction item, it would just be the one, so it really just kind of depends. You can add as little or as much as you want. Just the more crowded it is, the more you have to be aware of where you're placing things and everything is visible and that kind of thing.
What are some tips you have for how you place things?
Well, the waterfall design, the waterfall idea is one thing.
Okay.
I also don't like holes in my vignettes. So like if I've placed, okay, let me just use this as an example in the background. So right here, I would consider this a hole, this black space. I
Okay.
can't get my finger to move. This
Yeah.
is also a hole. I'm horrible at this.
So like a negative space or something that doesn't have anything
Yes.
interesting going on.
So like if I was going to style this as a vignette, I would probably put like another pot here so that you couldn't see that black space, or a stack of plates or a plant. I just don't like to be able to see. I like for it to look full. I don't like to be able to see through to the wall. Does that make sense? That's kind of hard to explain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you're filling in all of the
gaps, basically. Yeah. And then I like to layer things too. Like I like things to be different heights. I like them to be forward, backward. And something else I've learned, well, let me talk about that for a minute. So when you're layering, you can use anything. I was looking around for something I could show you. Like I use books all the time. I put stuff on top of books to make it higher than the thing that's sitting next to it. Especially, like I said, if I'm trying to create that waterfall, like I might have a really short object that looks good in the middle, but it needs some height, because if I don't give it height, then it won't flow into the design. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I use books a lot. I also use pieces of styrofoam. I use plastic grocery bags. I crumple them up and put them in. I've used dirty socks before. I mean, whatever is around that I can put in to lift things up. It's great with bowls too. That's a great technique where if you want to stack bowls, you might put something underneath the second bowl in the stack to elevate it. I like that look a lot. I've also learned that when you're looking at something with the naked eye, it's very different than when you're looking through your camera. So it's always good to like, you know, you like what you have, but then when you look at it through your camera, you might need to pull a flower pot forward, or you might need to push something back. And it looks really silly when you're looking at it with your naked eye, but in the camera, it's just right. So that's something else I've learned too, as far as photography.
Yeah, that's a great tip, actually. And I've noticed that too whenever like a lot of times taking pictures of people, even, you know, everything looks more spaced apart, I think, in the photograph than it actually is. So sometimes you need to be like right on top of each other for it to look like it's spaced properly. So yeah, that's a great idea. So do you use a little tripod to get your camera?
Sometimes I do. I use my tripod a lot for flat lays, because I find it very difficult to hold my hand still when they're like, you know, your hand is up here trying to photograph something. And then I use my tripod for videos. Sometimes if I'm doing like a reel of styling my finds or whatever. But for the most part, I'm literally I'm on my knees in front of a little chippy table right here in this formal dining room. And I have my iPhone, and I've just got, the table's got 2 white boards on it. And that's it. It is not a complicated setup at all.
Well, I hope people go to your Instagram, take a little bit of time, and this might be a good place to tell people what your address is on Instagram.
Yeah, it's at Shared Belongings.
Okay.
And it's the same on Facebook, but I do mostly post on Instagram.
Yeah. Okay. Well, take a look, everybody, because you'll be able to see exactly what we're talking about here, and then also see more of Jennifer's tips that are pinned to the top of her page there.
I love that.
I always like to do a couple of fun questions at the end with my guests. So I guess first one I'll ask is, would you like to share what your most exciting find is?
Yes, of course. So I won't say how much it costs because I did resell it. But the only time I have ever found an ironstone compote was, I would say, I don't know, maybe a year ago. and I saw it at the top of a shelf, and I wasn't sure that's what I was looking at until I got closer. I mean, I can identify ironstone pretty quick, but then I got closer to it and I saw the staining and the crazing, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think that's what that is. So I grabbed it, and the price was on the tag, and then the dealer had written "enjoy" next to the price. And I was like, oh my gosh, he knows what he has, and he's just trying to bless somebody.
Oh, that's such a great
I thought that
find.
was so sweet. But I did enjoy it for a little while, and then I sold it to a friend. So anyway, that's for sure. That's down as like a top find.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a good story.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you have that needs a really good home right now?
I mean, there's always stuff in my Etsy shop. I don't know if there's anything in particular. There's an ironstone pitcher in there that I'm really surprised hasn't sold yet. It's pretty much mint condition, and they're great for vases. I love using them for vases in the spring and summer with fresh flowers. So that's maybe an item somebody might be interested in.
And now is a great time for that.
Yes.
I love the way that flowers look in ironstone too.
Me too.
Do. It just sets off your flowers, I think. And
yes.
It's classic and goes with everything. So, okay. And your Etsy shop is also called Shared Belongings, right?
Oh, yes. Same handle, Shared Belongings.
Okay. All right. So if you're in the market for something to put your beautiful spring and summer flowers in,
there you go.
Shared Belongings on Etsy. And is there anything on your wish list, like in case maybe anybody out there is listening and they have something that
nobody's going to buy one of these and send it to me, but I'll tell you what it is. It's an ironstone cake stand. I want one. I don't know why. I just want one so bad. They're so beautiful. And Martha Stewart has come out with a copycat. You can send me one of those if you want to. But I just think they're so beautiful. And I have lots of friends up northeast who found them in the wild, and they're just, that's it. I just want to have one. I want to put it in my hutch, and I want to put stuff on top of it. And it's just one of those pieces that's like kind of rare to find, and they're very, very expensive. So yeah, that's on my wish list.
All right. Well, we'll all be on the lookout for an ironstone cake stand. That sounds like a great find.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good item to have on your wish list. So, well, before we wrap up, do you want to share your socials one more time, and also your Etsy shop and any other way that people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so my business, Shared Belongings, is on Facebook, Instagram, and Etsy, and it's all under the same handle, Shared Belongings. So you just have to search for me on those platforms, and I should pop up.
All right, that's great.
And I will say too about Etsy, if you want to favorite my shop, then you'll get notifications whenever items go in that are new. And that's kind of a fun way to keep up too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if anything goes on sale or anything like that, you're notified for all that stuff too.
And of course, follow on Instagram and Facebook. And I do sell a lot of stuff on Instagram first before it hits Etsy. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, then that might be something for you to consider.
Yeah. Well, Jennifer, I can't thank you enough for sharing your time and your awesome personality and all of your wisdom.
Thank you.
Today. Yeah, you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you. It's truly an honor. And I have to tell you, I think I may have already told you this. I love the title of your podcast and your catchphrase, "Let's dive in." Because I'm a writer too, and it just makes sense.
Well, again, choosing a name was really tough. It was a tough decision. And I thought, you know what? The way my brain works is all of these wonderful things are just swimming around in there all the time.
Yeah. Hey, that's perfect.
Vintage items, you never know what you're going to get. They're all colorful and individual. And I thought, that would be like a fun way to do it. And then it is kind of corny, but I love to say, let's dive in.
So. Oh, I love it.
All right. If you want to follow the Vintage Aquarium podcast, we are on several podcast stations. Right now, we're on Amazon Podcasts. We are on Spotify, and we're also on Google Podcasts. We're working on getting on Apple Podcasts. Everybody's requesting it. I'm trying to get it working out with Apple. So that will be happening soon. And then we're also on YouTube. So you should be able to find us at any of those locations. You can follow us on Instagram at Vintage Aquarium. And then there's also a link in my bio on Vintage Aquarium for you to sign up on the Instagram shop for you to sign up for the newsletter. So if you decide to sign up for the newsletter, you'll get notified when new episodes go live and we have any other kind of stories, information to share with you. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. Thank you, Jennifer.
It was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. Like I said, you're welcome back anytime.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you again.